Hey Kogras, love the video. Is there any update for 3.13 or still the same? Any updates to this in 3.13? Okay guys, look, I get it. You want me to update my Bleed EQ character for 3.13. Considering in my opinion this is GGG's best league and the Bleed EQ character is my most watched video to this date, I don't think I did enough justice back then, so it's a high time I give you guys something updated on this character of mine. Wait a minute, is that 7 million bleed DPS? Is that 65 million bleed damage over its duration? Let's talk about that. Bleed Earthquake. Now, if you guys don't really know how Earthquake really works, let me enlighten you a little bit. You slam your weapon on the floor, and after a short duration, a lot of big Earthquake spikes come out, doing an aftershock that does a lot more damage. How much more damage? Well, it actually does 150% more damage with elements and hits. And this is where the Bleed community came in and was like, look, it has 150% more damage with elements. Couldn't we just use this aftershock to then apply a massive bleed? And you, sir, are correct. And now, using our knowledge, we know now that any damage over time stat gets massively boosted by its base damage. Like Essence Ignite. Very, very similar. Thus, things like flat physical damage is a very big deal in terms of increasing your damage. Good to know, because now Chance to Bleed not only gives you a lot more damage for bleed, but also gives you a little bit of flat physical, making it the best bleed damage gem point by point. But here's the issue now. This is where the build starts to fall apart a little bit. For you see, enemies that are bled take way more damage, triple the damage to be exact, if they're moving. And this is where you kind of have to use your head a little bit. Think about it. We're a melee build. We're going to be on top of the boss. Is it really going to move? Probably not, and you don't want to rely on that. So this is where another issue comes in, and why bow builds are usually superior. It's a skill called Ensnaring Arrow. It makes them take additional projectile damage, which is really good for, you know, other builds like Ice Shot, Lightning Arrow, Barrage, whatever the case may be that is projectile. But it also makes the enemy act like it's always moving. So if you apply a bleed and then debuff it using Ensnaring Arrow, they will literally take 3 times the damage. A little bit of problem though. It's a bow skill. You have to be using a bow. So what other alternative do we have for Ensnaring Arrow as a melee build? Oh, look at here. We have a node called Crimson Dance. It allows you to stack a bleed up to 8 times, but they don't get extra damage if they're moving. But you also deal 50% less damage of bleed. It kind of makes bleed kind of a little bit like poison when you stack it, but only up to 8 times. But here's the problem with that when you're playing Earthquake. The initial hit of the Earthquake doesn't do a lot of damage of bleed. The aftershock does. So if you were to hit the enemy 4 times, you would get 4 of them with the initial hit, and the other 4 hits would be the aftershock. That's not really good for a lot of damage. So what can we do to actually apply a massive bleed using our 5-head brain? Well, it's actually incredibly simple. Since Ensnaring Arrow is considered a debuff, what we can do is apply a bleed using our melee hit, and then immediately swap to a bow, usually a cool rain because it has insanely fast attack speed, and use Ensnaring Arrow linked with increased duration and GMP, that way you don't miss, and the debuff lasts longer. What this happens is that the debuff gets snapshotted, and despite weapon swapping back into your weapon, the debuff still prolongs on the enemy, thus giving you 3 times the damage on a bleed that was applied with a melee hit, thus removing the downside of playing a melee build in comparison to a bow build. And this is amazing because Earthquake actually has a much higher damage multiplier for bleeds than the bow counterpart, Puncture. And sure, you can use the Asylum Helmet to get insane damage without 1 puncture. Here's the problem. You're channeling for a millennia, trying to get this insane puncture that has a high likelihood of missing because you're firing 1 freaking arrow at a moving target. You know how Cyrus teleports? Oh, last time I checked, Shaper also teleports, right? Nice DPS. I can watch you just run around trying to charge your damn channeling skill while I'm laughing in AoE as my Earthquake's Aftershock covers half the screen. And why does it cover half the screen? Because of a thing called Seismic Cry. If you didn't know, Earthquake is a slam attack. What does it mean to be a slam attack? It means that it can be exerted by war cries. Exerted attacks usually have a special effect depending on the type of war cry that you use. And since we're using Seismic Cry, not only do we get a buttload of AoE, we also get 30% more damage for the first hit, and a 30% additional more damage for each prior exerted attack. Since we have 4 exerted attacks when using 1 Seismic Cry, it actually gives us 120% more damage. But if we use the Measured Fury node on the tree, we can exert one additional attack for a total of 5 exerted attacks. So the bleed that happens on the 5th attack actually does 150% more damage. And how do you think that it actually affects bleed despite the fact that it only says damage? Well, I decided to research this myself because I wasn't confident. So I decided to go into the Reddit thread and I found a beautiful person asking the same question that I did. And as I go through the comments, I find Mark GGG, a creator of Grinding Gear Games. And he, the beautiful person that he is, decides to answer the question and confirm our suspicions that Seismic Cry indeed does affect bleeds. And also confirming the fact that other war cries such as Intimidating Cry, which doubles the damage of your hits, does not affect the bleed because it only affects the hits, not the bleed that happens thereafter. Which also means that all of you guys that absolutely hate war cries with a passion don't have to spam multiple war cries, that the only war cry we're going to be using is Seismic Cry. And because of that, we can also use Call to Arms, which while it makes our war cry share cooldown, since we're using one, it doesn't matter at all whatsoever. It also makes that one war cry instantaneously. So it will no longer lock you in an animation, basically for smooth ass gameplay. But the massive multipliers don't stop there. See, there's another gem that we can use when we use a slam. It's called Fist of War. Not only do you get this humongous, manly, ancestral spirit slamming the ground with this beautiful thunk, on top of that, that one hit does 100% more damage with elements, far surpassing any other support gem you can use, even for a bow build. And sure, it has a delay, but when your bleed lasts so freaking long, like over 10 seconds, who cares about the delay? It's like milliseconds in comparison. So it's absolutely beautiful. And here's what's even better. Why play a bow build if you're not going to get more damage than a melee build? And a melee build can just get the same amount of damage, but also being tankier. Why can he be tankier? Easy. It's called Gladiator. While a bow build cannot naturally get blocked without some weird way like Rumour's Concoction, it's very hard for them to get max block without using things like Glancing Blows and flasks like Gloomy Concoctions. But if we use a shield, we can use Surrender, or essentially any warlord base that allows you to recover life on block. Doing this, we can then get all the defensive nodes from Gladiator, giving us that beautiful block, giving us an insane chance to block at over 70%, and then also getting Versatile Combatant, allowing us to get that attack block and push it also to our spell block, allowing to block almost everything, except for damage over time, unfortunately. But it makes you almost invincible. It is insane the amount of defense it gives you. And on top of that, there are nodes like Fortify that we can use instead of Melee Phys. Since Melee Phys does a little bit more damage, since we're already doing 7 million damage over bleed, we can just put in a Fortify and be like, I'm strong enough, let me get a little bit more thick and get that nice Fortify. And that's what a bow build cannot do. But there's one small detail you probably forgotten. Unlike bow builds, Earthquake has a Vol Gem. And what does said Vol Gem do? Well, it makes your steps sound absolutely amazing. So amazing it sounds so freaking familiar. Think about it. What does this sound like to you? Because I don't know, man. Last time I checked, it sounded like something I really like to hear. You be the judge. With that out of the way, it's time to go over the 3 criteria for a good build. Criteria number 1, clear speed. Criteria number 2, defenses. And criteria number 3, the damage. Now, before we move on, if you guys have enjoyed what you've seen so far, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel. It helps me out immensely with the YouTube algorithm. On top of that, if you guys have any questions whatsoever, please go ahead and join the Discord community link down below, or go ahead and ask any questions in the YouTube comments, and I'll do my best to answer all of them as good as possible. And also, don't forget, guys, I do stream on Twitch every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, you know, just to get all these builds out for you guys. And I do some work, you know, out of those stream days on other build ideas that I may have. But those are the days that I usually stream. So if you guys want to see how these builds are made, catch me there. And, you know, I'm glad to hang out with you guys. And with that, guys, no further delays. Let's continue. Now, welcome back, guys, into the detailed version of the build guide. And his character is called Thick Earthbender. He's right here. He's my Gladiator Bleed Earthquake character. The gist of the build, obviously, is to use Earthquake with Fist of War, like that, to get a massive amount of AoE and get that sweet sound effect. To get that beautiful Earthquake to go out and do a lot of damage. And then after that, we then use the Snaring Arrow to debuff the enemy. Now, keep in mind, we also use Seismic Cry. That is Seismic Cry. You can put it on your walk like I used to, but the only issue with that is that since the way the Seismic Cry works is that each next attack that's exerted does more damage than the previous one by 30%. Makes a very big deal. The one that's going to do the most damage is the 5th attack. So in most scenarios, if for a boss fight, I would actually go and slam the 4 times, and then to have that number 1 sitting there. What I do now is, you know, obviously swap to our Flesh and Stone, the Blood Stance, to get that maim effect when you link it with maim to do more physical damage. And then finally get close to the enemy and slam it using Fist of War and that one last attack. The only issue with this is that if you have it on walk, it's going to automatically recover. So, for example, we're now at 1 exerted attack left over. If I have it on walk, what would end up happening is it'll reapply it again, and I'm back to 5. And that'll kind of ruin your damage. So I'd rather have Steel Skin for the extra armor and life from the buff effect, right? As a walk skill for more defense, and then just have, you know, my other Cry, since it's instant anyway, as another button on, you know, whenever I need it. We do have Blood Rage for more attack speed, and Bleach, basically, from the phys damage, and a little bit of Frenzy Charge duration, or generation. And now, I used to use Leaf Slam as well, but we dropped that because it does affect the Seismic Cry. Since Leap Slam is considered a slam skill, it does get exerted. So if you have 1 attack or like 1 attack remaining for the exerted attack, and then you Leap Slam, you would actually get rid of that and go back to 0. And for that very reason, I had to drop Leap Slam and now use Dash. I don't think that's a big of an issue, honestly, since Dash for second wind is pretty great on its own. And since we have that beautiful, of course, Vol Earthquake, we do have a Phase Flask to run through enemies with a Quicksilver and with Dash and everything. It comes out very, very, very nice. Also, very quickly, because I forgot to mention this, and it's actually very important, since we do have an Ensnaring Arrow as our weapon swap, you're probably wondering, won't we be vulnerable in that split second when we switch to our bow setup? And you're absolutely right. In order to offset this, we can use a Rear Guard Quiver, which has 23% chance of block attack damage and 14% chance of block attack damage. The max roll is like 24 and then 15, got 1 off each. It's kind of an expensive quiver if you try to get the max roll, but they're generally very cheap. And you just want to put this on your other source, as it's just there for block so that you can block some damage when you weapon swap. Combine this with a Rumi's Concoction, and even in this setup, we still have 50% chance to block, and then if you get hit and things like that with Gladiator, it'll jump to like 58. It's good enough for that split second that most likely you're never going to die when you're swapping to a bow, unless you be stupid with, you know, your damage over time. Let's go into a very quick map to showcase you what the build's possible and go over a little bit of the downsides of playing a Bleed character that, you know, we have to cover in order for you guys to understand really how a little bit more RNG Bleed is than other builds out there, right? Let's go right to that. Now, disclaimer right before we go into the map, this is a standard build because this build was made a long ass time ago. The build was still functioning, so I just, you know, revamped it and updated it using current things. You know, took out things like my Earthquake Reduced Duration Helm Enchant because it no longer exists. You know, there was a much better version of Circle of Guilt Sensitized Rings that had a higher, you know, buff effect and reduced mana reservation. I took that out and put a lower one, which is the current version, and things like that. And of course, I just put a bunch of like white Watchstones to get the Awakening of Weight. And we have some few sections here, things like actually Gloom Shrine, which must be super, super nice. I'm very excited about that. You know, extra monsters, and of course, a Legion Encounter. And then here, just one thing I want to mention before we continue is that since damage over time is something you should worry about, here we do have Vulnerability and Poison. Vulnerability makes you take more damage over time, so please be careful with that using, you know, things like Blood Rage, and Poison can be very deadly. But we should be fine either way despite all these stats. So let's go right ahead and jump right into this and add a little bit of Domination for just the extra pack size. We have Shaper, Bestiary, and Harbinger, just for fun. Right, so the gist of the character is that you don't really have to weapon swap.
The temptations of paradise draws forth the good and the bad alike.
Thank you, Shaper. Yeah, you don't really have to gem swap anything because Fist of War is your damage setup and your AoE. That's very, very good. You can see we do Blood Rage with vulnerability. We do drop a little bit faster than usual, but we should be fine. Seismic Cry.
I can't do this just yet.
And we just want to work right. And eventually what's happening, you get our Vol Earthquake, and you just walk around. Absolutely fantastic. Lower the volume a little bit, it's a little bit loud. All you gotta do is make sure that you apply your Seismic Cry here and there. You should have absolutely no problem absolutely destroying everything. All right, you do have dash for that instant dodge. All that block and everything comes in very, very handy. You know, this defense thing over here, just how I want it. You have a lot of armor. It's very, very beneficial. He's done. So, while the Vault Earthquake doesn't really do too much damage, what ends up happening is that since we are bleeding with enough damage, they then will explode due to the explosion from Gladiator. And due to that explosion, that little small hit will be more than enough to blow up the entire pack base. Oh, there's a Gloom Shrine. Hell yeah, boy. Let's continue. Now, there's one thing I just love about this build is just the satisfaction of just sound effects of the bleed pops of Fist of War. That's what really led me to building this, as it just sounded absolutely fantastic. You know, combine this with like maybe an explode chest piece if you so desire, it'd be very, very nice. You know. Oh, here's a Legion. Let me get my Vol Earthquake up again. We don't have to worry about porcupines at all, which is very, very nice. So many shrines, really. Now we have Vol Earthquake. We have Vol Molten Show as well. Boom. And you just walk around. Let the majority of the bleed do its thing. The Aftershock will, you know, expand and do the majority of the damage. Now, see, that's one issue with the Earthquake, since it has no longer has reduced duration. You know, we have to kind of at the mercy of that Aftershock, you know? It takes quite a bit for it to explode. If you don't like that too much, what you can do is use, what do you call it? Use less duration. It does less damage. I'm gonna take all that loot. Right, it will do less damage than what I'm using, but it'll probably feel a little bit better for mapping. I just don't like weapon swaps, or I mean gem swaps if I have to do it. So I mean, like, I'm fine with the duration hitters. The initial hit is more than enough damage, you know. Pop them, fly it, and just watch them bleed. And there you go. That's kind of like a little juiced up map, you know, tier 16. And it's like a breeze. Nothing really hurts you or anything like that. You just have to make sure you watch yourself for damage over time and things like that. So with that, guys, let's go right back into the detail of the gear and everything else. Now, before we get into the gear section and things like that, I do want to go over the skill tree. But one thing before all of that is that you have to realize the RNG-ness of bleed builds. And the reason behind this is simply because on top of the Fist of War, on top of the Seismic Cry last hit, we do want to be using weapons that have this mod 60% chance for bleeding inflicted with this weapon to do 100% more damage. You want an eye level 85 weapon ideally, and it has to be Elder. Now, it is considered a physical and an attack node, so you can try to get it using Harvest, using physical, you know, Reforged as physical, more common modifiers, or more common attack modifiers. But it's still very hard to get, guys, so keep that in mind, because this is conflicting with a lot of other prefixes. It's the prefix, so it's conflicting with like elemental damage to attacks. If you're doing attack, it's doing physical damage to attacks, physical damage percentage, physical damage, the hybrid nodes from Elder and the normal one. So it's still a very hard thing to get. So a weapon like this can be a little expensive. So while leveling, you can use things like Jack the Axe or your basic unique you know, axes that have bleed on it, and it'll be more than enough to get until you get something like this, right? And another thing that makes it a little bit more RNG, on top of that, at 60%, is Rosata's Coil. Rosata's Coil makes the more damage, like the top end of that physical, higher. So let's say instead of doing, let's say 50 to 100 is your range, it'll make your 100 150, but then it'll make your 50, since it has a less minimum physical attack damage, probably 25. So there's a chance that that bleed will be applied with a lower base damage or a higher base damage. So you combine that RNG with the fact that you have that 60% chance. There is a chance that when you hit the enemy, you will see F-all damage. Like literally F-all. You're like, well, did I even hit the damn guy? So what you have to do is just, again, apply another bleed. Even if it just takes another war cry. Like if this is like at 3, guys, you're still doing millions of damage that even at the first hit is still going to do a lot of damage. Just go ahead and reapply the bleed. You know, apply your ensnaring arrow. And the minute that you see that bleed do considerable damage, like you see it physically moving, you know you hit a good bleed. So keep that in mind. So with that, guys, let's go right into the POB. This is the updated one as of 3.13. Keep in mind down here we have different end game trees. You know, we have around level 35, level 71, and then level 91, which is my current character. I don't go to level 100. If you want to do that, I highly recommend just getting the rest of these block nodes to make sure you can copy your block without even needing a roomies, right? And just get more life, things like that. Right, so I try to get a little bit more of kind of a good enough defenses where I can tank the majority of things, but insane damage where I can be excited when I see that damn health bar just go and just drop, right? So the majority of it, let's start with our early game tree, and it's just going to be starting from the duelist, getting the life, getting even more life, Art of the Gladiator just for the movement speed, since you ignore movement penalties from armor, you know, attack speed. Same thing. You want to already be using a shield so you can pick up Defiance. There's a lot of early game shields, and I'll go over that when we talk about early game, you know, leveling, things like that. And you want to go for Golem's Blood and Dirty Techniques. Dirty Techniques is great for, you know, applying that bleeds, and you don't really need to care about the poison, but just for the damage over time multiplier, and the bleeds deal damage quicker, which is a DPS bonus, but not a total duration bonus. Keep that in mind. Right, same thing with bloodletting. Now, what you want to focus on is your chance to bleed. You don't have a 100% chance to bleed when you attack, so you want to make sure that you cap that out as high as possible. Things like bloodletting here have chance to bleed, 10% there, another 15% there, giving you a 24% chance to bleed, right? And for early on, you're most likely going to pick up blood in the eyes. Now, blood in the eyes has another 50% chance to bleed, so with that, you already add to around 75% chance to bleed, and that's more than enough. You keep that as kind of like your early ascendancy. You go in here, and by this time, you can use Enduring Cry. You can use that to level up with until you get your Seismic Cry. We do have Bloodless for more damage. You know, you have Red Storm for more chance to bleed. I believe at 10% there, another 15% there. This will cap out your bleed chance. Perfectly fine. Gives you a lot more bleed damage. And physical damage does affect the bleed because bleed damage is physical. Right? Aggressive Bastion gives you even more, a little bit of damage over time. But most importantly, it gives you endurance charges when you kill. I believe they nerfed it because I could have sworn it was when you block. But that's fine. If you get endurance charge on kill, I'll take it too. Good defensive anyway while clearing. And chance to block, which is very important for a Gladiator. You know, we get Juggernaut. Cleaving is amazing for even more damage in terms of bleeding. You inflict deals 15% faster. It's amazing for DPS. Absolutely great. I highly recommend it. There is Slaughter, which gives you a chance to get Onslaught on kill. But since we're already using a Silver Flask, to me it's just kind of useless, so I didn't bother with it. And we don't really care about the damage. It's not that great in terms of the overall scenario. And then Barbarism. And then you kind of want to rush for Resolute Technique as soon as you can. Your accuracy won't be impeded too much early on. You probably have a 100% chance to hit for quite a while. But the minute that you start seeing that your accuracy goes below 100, I say just shoot up for Resolute Technique as early as you can. That way, you know, your hits can't be evaded. And the crits do not matter because your critical strikes do not affect your bleed until you're using Perfect Agony. And there's no way in hell we're traveling all the way up there. And it's not worth it to use a Corralitos because it's mostly for poison anyway. Right? So not worth it to go crits at all in a bleed build whatsoever. Moving on to your medium jewels. And this, well, not medium gems, excuse me, your medium leveling tree. We do get a pick up a cluster jewel. Now, this requires level 40, and this one requires level 60, but you're around level 71 here. So you want to kind of pick this up towards the end of this mid-game tree. And the reason behind it is because the majority of a bleed build's damage comes from cluster jewels. And this is what I don't like about bleed builds really, is because there's not a lot of more multipliers from the tree. You really have to go out of your way to get a cluster jewel to get the majority of your damage, because they really just rely on the medium clusters. The medium clusters you really want to get is Wound Aggravation, because it gives you more damage of elements, 20%, and a 10% damage over time multiplier, which is a more multi. And then you want Rend. The reason why you want Rend is because not only does it give you insane damage over time multiplier, but the duration skyrockets. You see this? My bleed DPS only goes up 6%, but my total damage per bleed, meaning once I play that big bleed, how long it will last, and that total damage for that entire duration, which you can go to calculations right here. You know, go to Vault, go to Earthquake, go to Aftershock, and you can see your duration right here. It's 8 seconds. So over the 8 seconds, I'm going to be doing a lot of damage. This is not the real damage because we're in the mid-game tree. When we get to the end-game tree, you'll see it there. It's around 67 million over the 8 seconds, which is absolutely ridiculous because that basically means you can one-shot bosses, you know, once you get a good bleed off them. Things like that. If you don't have any good jewels, you can go ahead and drop them. Not a big deal. So you have something like this, right? I'll say that for you guys just in case. Right on top of that, at this point, you already have Seismic Cry, so you do want to pick up Measured Fury, so you get that 5th exerted attack. Very, very nice. Right, we come up here, and we do have Constitution, Path of the Warrior, you know, Jewel Socket for 1 point. Highly recommend you pick it up. Just for more life, and just has phys damage, so why not? Right on top of that, is pretty much that. We do get a Jewel Socket here, but again, if you don't have it, you can go ahead and just drop it till later. And really what ends up happening out of the, for that, the Ascendancy, right? You're going to pick up Gratuitous Violence for the explosions right after you pick up Blood in the Ice, and then go straight for Pain Forge for the extra block, and then you cannot be stunned when you block, which is very, very important, right? And then for endgame, the last thing you pick up is Versatile Companion, which turns all that chance to block attacks into chance to block spell damage. From my knowledge, this is basically like the only way to really cap your spell damage for incredibly cheap, because otherwise it's just way too much money, and I don't even know if it's possible. I think the only feasible way is Glancing Blows, and I hate using this thing because they nerfed it. And now a block normally blocks all the damage, which is why it's insane. Especially if you surrender, which means that not only blocking all the damage, since it's only a 75% chance to block, those 25% chance that they actually hit you will lower your life a bit. But since surrender, you know, recovers your life on block, it will just go straight up instantaneously once you get hit again. Glancing Blows doesn't allow that too well because now you're taking 65% of that damage from block. So to me, it's like, are you even blocking anymore? You know, but basically in the endgame tree, what ends up happening is we're going to, of course, fill out the rest of the jewel sockets. And most importantly, we get another cluster. Simple as that. The other thing I recommend here is getting like a Wasted Affliction. So you deal 10% damage faster. Up to you. You can go again for another random wound aggravation. Does not matter. And I do have an exposure therapy just for chaos res against damage over time, because damage over time is your enemy for a bleed gladiator, right? And that pretty much covers the leveling tree, right? For your bandits, you're basically going to get the 2 passive points to kill all the bandits. And because Alera gives you crit multi and doesn't really do much, and the rest just suck, right? So keep that. And then for your Pantheon, I recommend Sorvar Akali for reduced damage taken over time. And of course, Chikiri for, again, more reduced chaos damage taken over time, or just straight up chaos damage. It's going to be your enemy. So I highly recommend that for you guys. Now, to go over the leveling strat very, very quickly, one of the first gems you're going to pick up is Ground Slam at level 1. It's one of your first slam skills. Go ahead and use that. And then eventually you can either use Earth Shatter level 12 or Sunder level 12. I highly kind of recommend Sunder, I personally like more, but because Earth Shatter kind of needs a War Cry, but again, you do you. You can use Enduring Cry at this point, right? And then eventually in Act 3, you do want to swap to an Earthquake. And along the way, you will pick up Seismic Cry at level 16, which I believe is Act 2. Don't quote me on that, but I believe is Act 2, right? Now, the support gems you're going to be using at level 1, you're really going to get chance to bleed and instantly use that damn thing because it gives you a chance to bleed, which is very, very good, right? You get Maim. Fist of War happens in Act 4. You're still going to pick up things like Melee Phys. If you want defenses, you can still pick up Fortify in Act 2, right? Yeah, on top of that, you have Brutality in Act, believe, 4. I don't know if you can pick it up in Act 3 if you do the library quest. Don't call me on that, but I believe it's Act 4, right? And then Deadly Homage you get easily like in Act 2. So things like that. And you cap your bleed chance very, very easily. Now, one of the things I want to talk about is, of course, you know, how to craft your weapon starting on. So the first thing you want to really pick up is Rustic Sashes that are white. And then a weapon that you want to use, you buy it usually from the vendor in the town. You know, the vendor sells all the weapons. Try to get an axe from him and get a Blacksmith Whetstone. What you want to do with this, I just want to have it in my inventory. I guess I put it back by habit. Is you have 2 options. If you have a Transmute or you have an Elk. And determining on what rarity the belt is determines the type of roll you're going to get. So let me explain. If you transmute this, it turns to magic. You Elk one of the Rustic Sashes turns to a rare.
Cool wins.
You then sell that white base with a Blacksmith Whetstone and a blue one. You're going to get a Reaver, or say an axe, the same base type, with a physical damage modifier. If you get the blue one, you get the lower roll, which is around 40 to 49. That number can change. So if you put like a different build that's magic, you might go a 49% roll or 48% roll. Keep that in mind. I'm not sure if changing a blacksmith whitestone does change it, but I believe it does as well. So F around with it a little bit. Try to get that magic number, right? But if you put a rare one, you get a higher roll, much higher roll. In this case, it goes from 50 to 64%, and we get a 60% roll here, right? Very, very nice. So you can do that in order to craft weapons as you go up, and then you can go ahead and aug it to add like another stat, and then go craft phys at the bench. So for example, let's craft this one, right?
I can't do this just yet.
You're gonna go ahead and be safe and just straight up craft, you know, a little bit of let me put here. Oh wait, no, can't craft physical damage as a prefix, excuse me. You can either add attack speed, which I don't really recommend, so I've even just auging it and then regling it or something, right? And then you go and you can craft a little bit of physical damage to get some cheap one, like, you know, the 2 alks or the transmutes. If of course you don't have a regal to spare, then just craft attack speed or something of the like. That's good for a suffix. So if you go to, you know, suffixes, I recommend attack speed. You can get like a cheap one for 2 alk. If you have 2C, you're probably not leveling at that point, right? You can go ahead and craft it on your axe, right? Since it is a suffix. And that's pretty much what you do. And every time you go to a new town, you want to just craft a better axe. And then eventually you can get a better axe, like off the markets. You can find some pretty good one nowadays. But if you want to be cheaper, soul self found, actually I don't recommend it for soul self found. If you just want to buy a cheap axe, you can get a jack the axe. You can be soul self found, you might not get this axe. So that's why I don't want to recommend it to you guys. And it's decent, you know, has good attack speed, decent phys, but nothing in comparison to, of course, what I said earlier. You want a axe, either a siege axe for the attack speed or a reaver axe. Try to get quality at 30% using the perfect fossils, right? You have to keep using them until you get a 30% quality, and then just craft it using attack or physical modifiers from harvest until you get bleeding. And it gets pretty difficult. These things can be pretty expensive, so keep that in mind. This is probably your end game weapon, and you're aiming for something around 250 to 300 PDPS, right, with the bleed modifier. You can't expect to get more because the bleed modifier, the 60% chance to do 100% more damage, is a prefix which takes up a physical slot. Keep that in mind. Right, so that's pretty much the gist of that. You know, along the way, you're gonna pick up things like Blood Rage in Act 2, get second winds, of course, in Act 3, pick up dash as soon as you can in Act 1 for moving skin, movement basically. Steel skin, you get an Act 1 and instantly use it and put it on your walk. Since it's instant, it doesn't block any sort of movements or lock you in any animations. Right on top of that, you get a Herald of Purity in Act 2. Go ahead and pick that up. I then believe you get Pride in Act 3 as an aura. Then you get Flesh and Stone also in Act 2, but don't quote me on that. I think it might be Act 3. Right, simple as that. Right, and yeah, let's go over the gear now that we're talking about it very easily. I already went over the axe. Get phys damage, get a decent amount of attack speed, craft some phys. Your 2 base types you're looking for are a siege or a reaver axe. I level 85, and it has to be an elder base. Keep that in mind, right? And here we have steel skin linked with second wind and blood rage. The second wind's only for the steel skin to just have a smaller cooldown, so I can use it again. Simple as that. And blood rage. Blood rage is just there for the leech and the attack speed. But if you feel like you're degenning or you don't hate the degen, go ahead and drop it. It's up to you. Right? Our helmet is just basically life res, and you're gonna need that in, so I highly recommend getting intelligence. And here we have a 3 link and a 1 link. The 3 link is second wind, seismic cry. That way it has a smaller cooldown. Right, this thing. And dash again, so you can
do this just yet.
Double dash. And then here we have a separate Herald of Purity. You don't want to link with everything else because the second wind will affect Herald of Purity, causing the mana reservation to go up. You don't want to do that. Right, your shield, obviously you want to surrender for the armor that recover 250 life on block. Simple as that. But what you can do, and I highly recommend you do, is you can go to PoE DB. Right, this is your end all, like be all site for crafting and harvest. You can go to a offhand, no, there should be a shield right here, and you can get a similar modifier very simply going to the warlord over here, and you can get this mod here at level 68, so you can buy a very low eye level base. You have a chance to recover 3 to 5% of life when you block. It's decently rare, but it is a life modifier, so I believe, is it really? I think it's the only life modifier as a suffix. Oh no, you have regeneration life per second and life gain when you block. By the way, if you basically roll a shield that's eye level 68 or higher, that's a warlord, influence and you just reforge it using harvest with life modifiers, you're eventually going to get a shield with life gain, recover 3 to 5% of life when you block. And if you do the math, right, let's say you have like 5,200 HP times 0.04 in a medium, 208. It's a little less than a surrender, but of course the higher the roll the better. And it's just going to substantiate you until you get a surrender, because it is the end all be all in terms of armor. But you can get like literally minimum endurance charges. You can get, you know, area of effect here. You can get more life. You can get resistances. So, you know, at the end of the day, a rare shield might just be better for you, depending on what you craft. Let you know, surrender, while yes, it's expensive, it is not required. You can just craft it by yourself using a Warlord eye level 68 shield. Keep that in mind. Here, this is kind of unique to the surrender shield because it has the level 30 reckoning skill, which makes me, like when I block, I counteract an attack. I just have damage here. Chance to bleed, you know, melee phys, and brutality. You can put like chance to hit or, you know, other things. Oh, not chance to hit, chance to curse. Excuse me, not chance to curse. Hex touch, curse on hit. And there you can put like whatever curse you want. It's up to you. I have a curse on hit ring, so I don't really need that. But, you know, just so you know, you can put a hex touch vulnerability instead. And then let's say you don't have a surrender. I would highly recommend just getting, putting reckoning yourself there. And then just put hex touch and vulnerability if you don't have a curse on hit. That way, when you block, you will, you know, hit back and curse them with a curse. Moving on to our gloves. The melee damage does not affect the bleed, so don't have to buy spike glove. Don't recommend it. This is kind of like an old glove. What you're looking for here is really just life, res, and physical damage to attacks. And if you can fit in some attack speed just for quality of life, I highly recommend it. Don't get frenzy charge on kill. It's not necessary. Keep that in mind. Here we have linked flame golem with a Vol Molten Shell. I don't know why it's so damn big. You just can't read this damn thing, right? With casting damage taken, level 12, and Tempest Shield. Keep in mind that the level requirement is based off the casting damage taken gem. So flame golem is level 14, Vol Molten is level 15, and casting damage taken is level 12. The Tempest Shield can go higher, but it doesn't affect the chance to block, so I just left it the way it is, and that's it, right? Leave it at that. Your boots, life, rest, movement speed. Try to get 30% movement speed, because movement speed does affect your Vault Earthquake. Here we have Enlightened level 3 with Pride, Maim linked with Flesh and Stone. Flesh and Stone makes the enemy take 16% increased physical damage because he maims it. Well, Maim support makes that skills that maim take an additional 14% increased damage. If you separate Maim into your link, this will not stack. So the 16% will overpower the 14% from the Maim support gem on your main link. But if you link them together, they actually add together, and now it's 30% increased physical damage taken. I recommend. The only downside is that it reserves more mana for Flesh and Stone. But that's why we have Enlightened here, right? Moving on to your chest piece. This chest piece does not need crit. You cannot crit with, you know, I forgot the damn unwavering stance. So please don't get crit on this. I just got that. I will remove it from the POB so you guys don't see this. But the crit is just there because it was another chest piece that I got, and it dropped just like this, and I 6-linked it. It's a good chest piece. 100 life, dual good res, and 8% maximum life. I was happy with it as a chest piece. You don't need the crit. Now, what you can get, if you're just into that, you can get Explode mod for double pops. I don't think it can chain, but I believe that Explosion may be able to bleed, but don't count me on that. So it might be best just to get a minus mana cost chest piece using the Warlord Influence. This is good because if you get a Warlord Influence chest piece and you AUG attack, you are guaranteed to get minus mana cost for socketed gems. It's guaranteed, and you can craft some life on it. Simple as that. So Harvest is your best friend here. Highly recommend that. Here we have Earthquake. Highly recommend getting a Vol Earthquake level 21. Very, very cheap. Fist of War, you know, Deadly Elements, Fortify, or Melee Phys if you want more damage, but I highly recommend Fortify for the defenses. Chance to Bleed, and Brutality. Very, very simple. No gem swaps or single target. Moving on. Versatile Coil. Very expensive belt. It does make your maximum damage a lot higher. But it's totally not required in my opinion. The only thing that really makes it like stand out is that more multi and the flat phys. But until then, you can just use a Stygian Vise with life and res. And then if you want, get a Abyssal Jewel with, I recommend a little bit of phys to attacks with axes, or just in general phys to attacks with life. Simple as that. You know, if you need a little bit of intelligence, go ahead and get some of the Abyssal Jewel as well. Until you get a Versatile Coil, because they're kind of expensive. The other one, Circle of Guilt rings. These are actually very cheap compared to the Circle of Ash rings for Herald of Ash. And you want buff effect and reduce mana reservation. That way you fit everything. And that's pretty much it. The top modifiers we're looking for is really just ailment damage. I don't think they have bleed, but they have bleed damage. Go for that as well. Maximum life is damage. This one's garbage. None of that affects me, unfortunately, but it is what it is. And then the other ring. You ideally want steel rings for your rings, but if you need the res, go ahead and just get another res. So the steel ring is just your best in damage slot. And here what you basically want is life as much as possible, resistances, extra phys if you can, and then non-challenging skills have minus 9 to total mana cost. It's a very cheap craft, and the whole purpose of this is that, you know, to fit all your auras in, especially since we're not using a level 4 enlightened. So if you go to your rings and you go to mana cost, it costs around 4 chaos. I highly recommend going to the Discord for the treasure trove, I believe what it's called, and there they'll help you out in doing this. Since I was scammed recently in Global 820, I highly don't recommend using Global 820, but you take your own risks. You know, make sure to tip and things like that. They'll ask, they'll tell you how much they're going to charge for this. It's very, very cheap. You know, if you get minus 8, no biggie. But if you do have a minus mana cost chest piece, you only need one of these because I do have another minus mana cost on my Ami. The reason why you want at least minimum one is because your leaps, well, I guess your dash and things like that take up mana.
I can't do this just yet.
I take it back. I used to use leap slam and that's why I had it, but now that we're using dash, honestly, it's not that big of a deal. But I still recommend it just to reduce the steel skin mana cost and the seismic cry mana cost to just basically super small so you don't feel it. So keep at least one. If you don't have a minus mana cost chest piece, then get another and that'll be more than enough to support your earthquake. Well, you have many options here. So the other thing you can do is on a steel ring, if you get a warlord base, you can get vulnerability on it. So if you go to PoE, you go to jewelry and you go to rings, right? Here we go. You go to warlord. The curse on hit is a caster modifier. So if you were to re-roll with caster modifiers, you're highly likely to get a ring. You might get like cast speed, right? You can remove that or just keep rolling until you just get the curse by itself. And just keep doing that. Just every time you see a harvest, put the warlord ring in there. Make sure it's item level 80 or higher. Whatever base you can afford. You know, it can be a 2-stone ring, an iron ring, steel ring, whatever you can afford. And every time you go meet a harvest, get the physical modifier one. Or not, excuse me, the caster modifier one. And throw it in there and just put reforge with a higher chance of getting caster modifiers. And you're bound to find a nice ring with, you know, vulnerability and life and maybe some res if you're lucky, without overpaying for it in the market. So harvest is your best friend here. Highly recommend that. Pretty much the gist of that. And then Ami is just physical damage to attacks, life, and then a minus mana cost. If you have the money, get an elder base and get physical damage over time multiplier. Totally not needed. Obviously not. And then for your anointment, highly recommend Command of Steel because it gives you a chance to block as well. But you also get 1% increased damage per 1% chance to block. So since we're max block with Vumix Concoction and everything, this gives us 75% increased damage, which affects our bleed. So it's great. It's actually very cheap. Doesn't require anything. Doesn't need silver oils, not even golden. It's just a orange, a red one, and the rainbow one. I think it's phantasmal. And that's pretty much the gist of the build, guys. There's nothing really complicated about this, right? The complication really becomes in the way your playstyle. So make sure that, you know, fighting bosses, you get that one last Seismic Cry exert attack. You know, make sure that you're in blood stands for flesh and stone, things like that. You have Wall Molten Shield to tank things with your block. Keep that in mind. If that hits sucks, go ahead and Seismic Cry again and keep hitting with your Fist of War until that bleed, you know, it's noticeable, and then go ahead and just apply your ensnaring arrow. And that's pretty much it. I hope you guys enjoy. This is kind of a little update. And yeah, let's move on to the outro and talk about some of the things I'm working on right now. And with that, guys, that pretty much covers everything for the build. This character has been updated. I'm still, you know, working on another character called it's an Onigoroshi build. Cyclone, kind of reviving that whole movement speed meta that I made back before. Trying to make it as good as possible. Have some new ideas. Hopefully it'll work out pretty well, as the DPS is absolutely nuts. And as for the people who are curious about the Elementalist Divine Ire Ignite build, I have updated the POB, or just added a new POB that's final into that video. And I will be making the final guide next week, since this one's already done, right? We'll be moving on, and after that, it's probably going to be new builds that I make. And if I have some downtime in between, or a build takes a little too long to min-max, I'll throw in some other builds that that were really cool. You guys might enjoy as well. But with that, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed what you just saw. And yeah, please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next informative video or a detailed guide. See you guys later.